The asbestos issue is not a thing of the past. It continues to this day.
We want to end this man-made disaster.
So let's ban asbestos.
So thank you very much for the invitation. So I represent today the French National Association for Defense of Victims of Asbestos. So two of us only made it here, Pierre and I. But it is today quite a large association. We count 28,000 members, and we have been working for now 18 years in France, and I think it is fair to say that we have changed the landscape, even if we didn't achieve everything we wanted to. So I want to quickly show you in some sort of a brief history of asbestos in France. Then I want to take a little tour around the world to see where we are, who's producing asbestos, who's not. I want to try, I'm sure you're all convinced, but to say once again why USA and Canada should ban asbestos. And I'll finish with a few words of what should we do, what could we do. So asbestos started at the end of 19th century in France. The first were textile factories coming actually from England in Normandy. And 15 years later, a work inspector published a report. I've given you the title in French. I think it's easy to understand. The main fact is that in that factory, this inspector had interviewed a surviving worker. There were 50 workers in that workshop. He was the only survivor. All of the others had died in the previous 5 years. Inspector Oribo also provided technical advices to diminish the quantity of dust and to try to prevent this disease, who was unknown at the time. Unfortunately, he was ignored. Later, 1930 is the date of the great work of Meriwether in United Kingdom. This was largely publicized in France with a report of death. So this was at the time we were speaking of asbestosis, not cancer. Again, it was ignored essentially by authorities. The only respite, was World War II, because there was no asbestos in France during that time. The same thing happened in Germany, of course. So what was the answer of Eternit France, of course? Well, they had no asbestos, so they opened a mine in Corsica. That mine was run for about 20 years. I think it closed in 65. It leaves an absolute disaster. There's piles of asbestos in the sea and on the shore. So end of the war was the first official recognition of occupational disease, only asbestos. You had to wait another 30 years before having mesothelioma and lung cancer recognized as occupational disease. And 2 years more to have the first prevention legislation specific to asbestos. Of course, there was general legislation, but nothing more specific. A year later, asbestos spray was forbidden. The 80s, I call it the asbestos lobby against public health. The 92 is an important year in France. It was created the so-called Comité Permanent Amiante, which looked like a very official commission to deal with problems with health of asbestos. There were ministry's representative on its board. There were medical doctors. There was the industry, unions. The only problem is that it was actually just a public relation operation financed by the industry. But it basically ruled what happened in France in the next 13 years. So outside France, since things were moving, I've quoted the European Community Directive of '83. It's not the first directive on asbestos, but it's just the strongest. It even includes gastrointestinal cancer as that should be recognized as an occupational disease. Then, well, 84, there's the creation of the infamous Asbestos Institute, renamed Chrysotal in 2003. Well, as you all know, in the United States in '89, EPA tried to ban asbestos, and this ban was overturned. In Europe, there's between 80 and 93, I counted 10 European countries who banned asbestos. I think the first one was Denmark, and in that list, the last one was Germany. In between, you notice Italy. Italy was a big producer of asbestos. Things changed. I've called 96 the turning point. Perhaps it's a bit preposterous, but it was also the year of the creation, the official creation of Endeavour. But a lot of things have happened this year. There was the first coherent legislation for prevention of asbestos disease. It was the year the Endeavour started a lawsuit against Unknown for injury, homicide, poisoning, criminal omission. The next day, I took my phone and I called the CPA, the Comité Permanent Amiante. The telephone was shut. It was also the year of the publication of the INSERM report. INSERM is the National Institute of Medical Research. And it was the same year that the government announced a ban on asbestos. The years after the ban, well, one of the important events was, of course, the complaint by Canada against France at the World Trade Organization. Well, luckily or normally, the World Trade Organization upheld the France ban. Canada appealed and lost again in the appeal. It should be made clear also that there was something basically wrong in this procedure, is that the burden of proof was on France. I mean, France had to prove that asbestos was dangerous and that there was no other way France could protect its population. It should have been the other way around. That's WTO. There was big changes the next year in the compensation system in France. The French Supreme Court changed the jurisprudence for regarding employers' obligation towards health and safety. And there was the creation of something that is very important for asbestos victims in France, the National Fund for Asbestos Victims, which perhaps, if there's any question, I'll be happy to describe this more precisely. It's something that, in my mind, in our mind, really meets the need of people. Now, I want to switch to the international part. Well, this certainly started with two events. The Clemenceau saga, I will say more in the next slide, and something that looks like a puppet show. The Canadian Chrysotal Institute sued us for defamation. I'm so proud of the sentence. I had written the paper that I will read it to you. The Asbestos Institute is a very active organism of propaganda and corruption. They didn't like that. I don't know why. Do you know what that is? Fernanda knows where it is. It is a sugar loaf in Rio de Janeiro. The French Navy had 2 aircraft carriers. One of them, the Foch, was, I've written Salt Given because it's quite obscure how it ended up in the Brazil Navy, but that's where it stands now. The other one was the Clemenceau, who's probably known to a lot of people here. There was a huge international justice battle around the Clemenceau, who was, in principle, sold to the shipyard breaking of Alang in India. And we launched a suit suing the government, saying that it was absolutely illegal to do that, that the ship was riddled with asbestos. The Minister of Defense made a statement that the asbestos had been removed. Luckily, we were able to prove that she was lying. And so we won the case in France, in the Supreme Court. Perhaps I will skip that. I wanted to give a very quick, maybe I'll show. Sorry, that was. So the main producers, there's only 4 producers now in the world. That's Russia, China, Brazil, and Kazakhstan. Consumption by continent. Well, you will see that there's only 3 parts of the world where you really use asbestos. That's in Asia, in Russia and neighbors, and essentially in Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia. There's pictures from India where you see even raw asbestos. And okay, I'll switch perhaps to the last. Sorry, I miscalculated this. Well, that was our demonstration in Paris. You can see Richard Lemon handling the flag. And this is a book we're going to publish on this. And here's what I wanted us to do, and above all, help other countries to achieve these goals. Sorry.
Thank you so much.